Howdy ho there, friends and neighbors. Bobby here today. Hey folks, today we're going to be doing a front brake job on a 2001 Ford F-150 pickup truck. Bring the camera on over. We'll show you the parts we're using today and some of the tools that we'll be using today. We're going to be using a set of Napa's Adaptive 1 pads. These are very nice brake pads. Some of the best aftermarket pads on the market, I do believe. It comes with the brake pads, of course, and all brand new hardware as well. And it comes with some ceramic lubricating grease. So let's move these out of the way right quick, and let's talk about the tools that you're going to need. Now I believe we're going to be able to machine our rotors today instead of replacing them. And if you are going to machine your rotors, you need to have access to a brake spec book or borrow one from someone, and you will need a vernier caliper or a 0 to 1 micrometer to mic your rotors as well. And over here, we'll start over here. You will possibly need an impact wrench and an air ratchet. If you don't have that, a long breaker bar and some regular hand ratchets will definitely be required. A couple sockets you'll need. You'll need a 21 to pull your wheels off with. You'll need a 13 millimeter. I'm going to use a swivel for the caliper bracket. For the caliper, to remove the caliper, and to remove the caliper bracket, you're going to need an 18 millimeter socket. You'll probably need that breaker bar to break that loose. And I will also use an 18 millimeter swivel. I think it's connected to my air ratchet here. I'll be using an air ratchet instead of a regular ratchet. And a couple other things you'll need to press back your caliper, either a big pair of channel locks or a C-clamp. You will need some wheel bearing grease because this is not a floating rotor. This is the one that has the tapered roller bearings on each side, so you will have to clean them and repack them. We also have a couple cans of brake clean here, some 3M silicone paste, and some anti-seize, and a screwdriver and a torque stick for tightening the wheels back down. All right, friends, we're going to get this brake job started, so stay tuned. First of all, we're going to go ahead and take our 3/8 air ratchet with a 13 millimeter socket. We're going to pull both of these caliper bolts out. So let's go ahead and get started on that. Okay, with those two bolts removed, we're going to take our caliper and find yourself like a 5-gallon bucket or something. It works great because instead of letting your caliper hang, because you don't want to put any stress on your brake hose, a little 5-gallon bucket works real good for that. Next, we need to remove the caliper bracket. It has two 18 millimeter headed bolts. So we're going to take our breaker bar and just break these loose right quick. Now we'll take our 3/8 air ratchet with the 18 millimeter swivel socket on it, and we'll back these out. Okay, friends, with a cold chisel and a hammer, you can actually remove your dust cap off of the center of the rotor. Okay, now with that dust cap removed, we need to remove this cotter pin. And we'll just straighten it up with a pair of needle nose pliers here the best we can and try to slide it on out. Okay, now friends, we can go ahead and remove our locking retainer. We'll lay it aside. And we've got a 1 1/16 socket that we're going to loosen our nut here. And we're going to back that all the way out. And then we'll remove our outer wheel bearing. All right, friends, now take your nut and screw that back on a couple threads. 2 or 3 threads is all you really need. And then take the rotor and let it slide down the spindle. And what you want to do is let that rear bearing catch on that nut and just kind of slap it a couple times. And you actually can remove the rear seal without damaging it if you do it that way. Now with the rotor off, we went ahead and carried it over here to the bench. We're going to look up our spec for our rotor, and it looks like our minimum discard is 965 thousandths. Now I'm going to mic this rotor just to make sure we can machine them. And it looks like we are at 1 20 thousandths right now, so we have plenty of material on this rotor to machine. So let's take it on over to the brake lathe. Okay, friends, we got a rotor on our brake lathe here, and we're getting ready to machine it. Now I know not all of you guys out there have your own brake lathe like I do, so I won't really go into great detail on machining the rotors. But if you would like to see, we do have a video on machining rotors, and we'll put a link for that down below. Okay, friends, while we're waiting on our brake lathe to cut, we got our bearings here. We're going to go ahead and we got a little bit of mineral spirits here in the little container, and we're going to go ahead and get all this stuff cleaned up and ready to go back together. Okay, we got all the bearings cleaned up, and we're going to go ahead and get them all packed up. And friends, I'm going to show you the old-fashioned way to do it. Just put on a pair of latex gloves if you got it. I don't own a bearing packer. I do it the old school way. I just put some grease in the palm of my hand and just pack these bearings right on up. It does a pretty good job. And now for the outer bearing, we'll go ahead and get it packed up too. So when our rotor gets done, we'll be ready to go ahead and reassemble. Okay, we've got our rotor off of the lathe, and we took it outside, washed it with some soap and water, rinsed it really good, and dried it with compressed air, and we're ready to go ahead and put our bearings in place. So friends, I'm going to take just about that much grease right there, and I'm going to put it in the inside of this hub and just kind of smear it around. A little extra grease inside there will help to dissipate heat. So we're going to slide that in there and lube up that inner race good. And then we're going to go ahead and take our inner bearing, and we are going to put it in place. And then we're going to take our grease seal, which we wiped all the old grease off of it, and we're going to slide it right there in place and take a hammer and just tap it back in place. Okay, we're ready to install it to the car. Before we put that rotor on, I'm going to go and take a little bit of grease and grease up the spindle. Now, I've already cleaned all the old grease off of it, but I'm just going to go and put a nice little thin coat of wheel bearing grease on our spindle before we install it. Okay, let's go ahead and put this rotor back on the car. So we're going to slide it on. Remember, we have our inner bearing and grease seal already installed. We're going to install our outer bearing. It's going to slide in just like so. I'm going to say just like so. Okay, there we go. Now it's seated. We're going to take our thrust washer here, and we're going to go ahead and put it in place, and I'm going to turn it the exact same way that it come off. And then we have our nut. I'm going to put it on the same way. And then we're going to take our 1" 16th of an inch socket, and we're going to set the preload on here. Now friends, these don't take very much preload at all, and what I like to do is just go ahead and spin the rotor, and we're just going to add a little preload by hand. These are used bearings. If it was a new bearing, I would probably add just a little bit more preload, but actually you got to kind of get a feel for it. It's just the slightest bit of torque on that bolt, just enough to put just a little bit of preload on that bearing. Now we will install the locking retainer. Notice there's a hole through the spindle, so we want to line this locking retainer up to where we can actually get the cotter pin through there. And you might have to try it just a time or two to see where it lines up the best, and that looks like that's it right there. Slide our cotter pin in place, and then we'll take our needle nose pliers and see if I can get a hold of it. Things are always harder when you're trying to film a video. So there we go, got that side bent up, that side bent up, and we're ready to install the dust cap. Okay, we'll slide our little dust cap on here in place, take a hammer, give it a few taps, and you're good to go. Now with our big C-clamp and an old brake pad, we're going to slide it right up against this, up against the pistons on this caliper, and we're going to go ahead and squeeze this caliper back slowly. Okay, the kit comes with this new spring here to put a little bit of tension on the caliper, so we're going to go ahead and replace it as well. So we're going to take a screwdriver and pop our old one off, and then we'll pop our new one in place. Okay, over here back at the bench, we're going to go ahead and get our caliper brackets ready with pads. We're going to take these old spring clips off of here because the kit comes with brand new ones. Then we'll take a screwdriver and just pop them out of place. And then we'll take our wire brush And we'll just go right down here on the ground right quick. And we will brush some of the rust and dust that has collected over years off of this surface here. Okay, with the caliper bracket nice and clean, we're going to go ahead and install these new stainless steel clips here for the pads to ride on. We're going to snap those right into place on both sides, and then we'll be ready to lube up these pins. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and pull our caliper pins out, and we're going to lube them up real good. So let's pull them out, wipe them clean one time, and we'll take our 3M silicone paste and we will grease these things up good. We'll shove it back in and actually kind of twist it and work it around and work all that grease into the inside of this slide. Okay, with a little bit of this ceramic grease that come with the pads, we're just going to dab a little bit on the insides of these stainless clips. Give a little bit of lubricant for our pads to ride on. Now we're going to go ahead and install this caliper bracket back onto the car. So we will start these 18mm headed bolts by hand, and then we'll tighten them down with our 3/8 drive air ratchet and the 18mm swivel socket. Okay, now we'll take our torque wrench and we'll go ahead and torque these things down the spec. Okay folks, time to put the pads on. Notice these Adaptive 1 pads are actually marked inner pad, outer pad. It has some technology to where they actually have a different braking material on both of these pads. That's why they mark them inner and outer. So let's go ahead and put our inner pad on the inside here. And we'll just slide it right there and it should hold in place. Put our outer pad right out here, and then we're ready to install our caliper. Before we slide this caliper on, I'm going to take a little bit of this anti-seize and just rub a thin coat on the outside of the pad and on the inner pad as well, and that will help to eliminate some brake squeak. Now we can install our caliper. And then start our bolts by hand. And then we'll be ready to wrap this brake job up. Okay friends, we'll use our 13mm box end wrench here and we'll just check the torque on these caliper bolts. And that feels pretty good right there, and I think we're just about done with this brake job. Friends, I want to thank you for watching our video today. Don't forget to subscribe and tell a friend about us. Leave us a comment down below. And once again, friends, we'll have that link to the other video on doing the operating a brake lathe if you'd like to watch that. And we'll also have some links down below for some of the tools that we used in this job today. Take care, and we'll see you next time.